Welcome to a deep dive,
Yeah.
into something I think we've all thought about at one point or another, the connection between the human mind and religion.
Yeah, it's a question that's really fascinated thinkers for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's really exciting now is that we have an entire field dedicated to it.
Right.
The cognitive science of religion, or CSR for
Yeah,
short.
yeah, you've shared some seriously in-depth academic papers and books with me on this. So we're going way beyond just the typical, religion versus science debate here.
Right.
What's CSR really all about?
Well, it's about trying to understand how our minds, shaped by evolution and culture,
Right.
make us receptive to religious ideas and practices.
Okay.
Instead of seeing religion as something that's separate from our biology,
Right.
it looks at how deeply intertwined they might be.
Okay, so instead of asking, is religion true, we're asking, why does religion make sense to our brains?
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, think about how easily we see faces in random patterns,
Mm.
or assume there's a reason behind events, even when there might not be.
Yeah.
That's our brain's agency detection system at work.
Oh, yeah.
And some researchers think that this plays a role in how we conceive of gods and supernatural forces.
So our ancestors see a lightning strike, and instead of just physics, their brains go, powerful being must be angry.
Right.
That makes sense in an evolutionary context, I guess. But what about all the elaborate rituals and beliefs that religions develop?
Yeah.
Does CSR have insights into those too?
It certainly does take rituals, especially ones that involve hardship or sacrifice.
Hmm.
They might seem counterintuitive at first,
Right.
but they can actually create very strong social bonds.
Yeah.
There's a neurological basis for this involving things like endorphin release and synchronized movement.
Interesting.
It's like our brains are wired to connect intense shared experiences with group cohesion.
Fascinating. So even something that seems irrational from the outside could be serving a very real purpose in terms of group survival.
Right.
And bonding this really challenges that simplistic view that religion is just about blind faith, doesn't it?
Absolutely. One of the key insights from CSR is that there's often a gap
Yeah.
between how people explicitly explain their faith
Right.
and how their minds intuitively process religious concepts.
Yep.
Our intuitive thinking about gods and the supernatural might not always line up with complex theological doctrines.
So you could know all the rules in scriptures, but your brain might still be operating on a more primal level when it comes to religious experiences.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to see how this field challenges some basic assumptions about religion.
It definitely raises some interesting questions.
Yeah.
And one of those questions is about the nature of special objects.
Okay.
Things that are imbued with religious significance
Okay.
are often believed to have supernatural powers.
Like relics, lucky charms, those sorts of things.
Exactly.
I've always wondered about those. What makes a simple object suddenly sacred?
Well, that's a question that has fascinated anthropologists.
Right.
And now cognitive scientists as well. You see, our brains are wired to find patterns and explanations.
Mm-hmm.
So when something extraordinary happens, we tend to look for a cause.
Yeah.
And often that cause involves attributing special properties to objects that were present at the time.
So if I win a big poker game while wearing my grandfather's lucky hat, I might start to think the hat itself has power.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like superstition, but I can see how our brains are predisposed to make those kinds of connections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the rituals that build up around these objects, the
Right.
stories we tell about them,
Right.
all of that reinforces their significance.
Right.
They become focal points for belief and communal practice.
I'm starting to see religion in a whole new light. But if our brains are so good at finding meaning and purpose, even where it might not exist, does that mean all religious beliefs are just illusions?
Well, that's a big philosophical question,
Right.
and one that CSR doesn't necessarily try to answer. But what it does offer is a deeper understanding of the mental processes that make us receptive to those beliefs in the first place.
So instead of just debating whether religion is true or false, we can start to examine the very human reasons why it's been such a powerful force throughout history.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And those reasons are often more complex and nuanced than we might initially think.
Okay, we've talked about how our brains make us prone to religious thinking,
Yeah.
but what about the actual experience of faith? Does CSR delve into that as well?
It does, and it gets particularly interesting when we start looking at the neuroscience of religious experience.
Okay.
Researchers have used brain imaging techniques like fMRI to study what happens in the brain during practices like prayer or meditation.
So we're talking about actually measuring the neurological activity
Mm-hmm.
associated with religious experience.
Exactly. And what they're finding is that these practices activate areas of the brain associated with things like Emotion regulation,
Well,
social connection, and even the reward pathways that are activated by things like food or sex.
wow, so that feeling of peace and transcendence that people describe during prayer is not just some vague spiritual concept. It's actually reflected in measurable brain activity. That's pretty wild.
It is, and it opens up a whole new way of understanding the profound impact that religious practices can have on our minds and bodies.
This is all incredibly fascinating. It's like we're peeking behind the curtain of religious experience and seeing the intricate workings of the human brain at play.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, how does this neurological perspective sit with traditional religious views?
Well, it's a question that's generating a lot of discussion.
Right.
Some people worry that explaining the biological basis of religious experience somehow diminishes its spiritual significance.
Right.
But others see it as enhancing our understanding of the deep connection between our minds, bodies,
Yeah.
and the universe around us.
It's almost like saying the beauty of a sunset is less real because we understand the physics of light and color. I can see how some people might be uncomfortable with this line of inquiry.
Yeah.
But personally, I find it incredibly thought-provoking.
It definitely challenges us to think about religion in new ways.
Yeah.
And that's really what CSR is all about, asking new questions, exploring new perspectives, and ultimately gaining a deeper understanding of the human condition.
So we've talked about how our brains are primed for religious thought
Right?
and how religious experiences have measurable neurological effects. But what about the way faith actually plays out in people's lives? Does CSR address that practical side of religion as well?
It does, and it uses the concept of lived faith to describe how religious beliefs are put into practice in everyday life.
Okay.
And as you might expect, CSR research has uncovered some interesting dynamics here as well.
Like what?
Well, one of the things that jumps out from the research is that there can be a disconnect between what people say they believe and how they actually act. This is especially true with complex theological ideas.
So someone might wholeheartedly agree with a doctrine about compassion, but then struggle to actually be compassionate in their daily life. We've probably all experienced that gap between ideals and actions, at some point religious or not.
Precisely, lived faith is about that messy, complicated space where beliefs meet reality. And CSR researchers have found that things like teleological reasoning, the tendency to see purpose and design in the world, can play a big role here.
So if I believe that everything happens for a reason,
Right.
or that a higher power has a plan for me, I might interpret my experiences good or bad in a way that fits that belief.
That's one way it can work. It can also lead to a sense of meaning and purpose, even when faced with difficult circumstances. Of course, this raises the question of how people reconcile faith with suffering and evil, which some of the papers you shared explore in depth.
It makes you wonder, does our brain's inclination to find patterns and meaning ever work against us in those situations? Do we force fit events into a narrative that might not be there?
That's certainly a possibility, and different religious traditions have different ways of addressing this problem, with varying levels of emphasis on free will, divine justice, or the idea of karma.
It's interesting to think about how these different frameworks for understanding suffering are shaped by both cultural influences and our own cognitive biases.
Exactly, and it highlights one of the key insights from CSR religious practices can shape our understanding of the world, even on an unconscious level.
It sounds like CSR is challenging the idea that religion is solely a matter of conscious choice and belief.
Right.
It's suggesting that there are deeper cognitive processes at play that we might not even be aware of.
That's a big part of it, and it has implications for how we think about the future of religion, especially in a world that's increasingly shaped by science and technology.
That's something I wanted to ask about. If science can explain so much about the world and our brains, will there still be a place for religious belief? Does CSR offer any insights into that?
Well, what's fascinating is that CSR doesn't see science and religion as being inherently in opposition. In fact, some of the research suggests that religious thinking is so deeply embedded in human cognition that it's likely to persist in some form, even as our scientific understanding advances.
So even with all our technological advancements, those fundamental human impulses towards meaning-making and social connection aren't going away.
It seems that way, but that doesn't mean religion will remain static. We're already seeing religious traditions adapt to the challenges of a scientific worldview, finding ways to integrate new knowledge into their belief systems.
It makes me think about how some religions have incorporated ideas from evolutionary biology or quantum physics into their theological frameworks.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're trying to bridge the gap between faith and reason.
That's a great example, and it leads to a fascinating question. Is this genuine integration or just a way for religion to stay relevant in a changing world?
I can see how it could be interpreted either way. But regardless of the motivation, it's fascinating to watch how religious thought is evolving in response to scientific discoveries.
Absolutely. And it underscores the fact that the relationship between science and religion is far more complex than a simple conflict narrative suggests.
It's more of a dance than a battle, maybe two different ways of trying to make sense of the world, sometimes clashing, sometimes intertwining.
That's a great analogy. And CSR provides a framework for understanding that dance, for seeing how these seemingly disparate domains, science and religion, actually share some common roots in the human mind.
We've talked a lot about the cognitive mechanisms behind religious belief, but what about the social and cultural factors? Do those play a role as well?
Absolutely. CSR research emphasizes the role of social learning and cultural transmission in shaping religious beliefs. Our beliefs are not just formed in isolation, they're influenced by the communities we belong to,
Right.
the stories we hear, the rituals we participate in.
So even if our brains are primed for religious thought, the specific content of our beliefs is largely shaped by our environment.
Exactly. Think about it. Children raised in religious households absorb not just doctrines, but also a whole way of seeing the world, understanding morality, and relating to the transcendent.
Yeah.
And those early experiences can have a lasting impact.
That makes me think about how some people raised in very religious environments eventually move away from those beliefs,
Ooh.
while others hold on to them even more tightly. Does CSR offer any insights into why people react so differently to similar upbringings?
It's a complex question, and there are a lot of individual factors involved, but some research suggests that people raised in secular households might be more prone to analytical thinking and less intuitive in their reasoning.
So while the religious mind might be more inclined to see purpose in design, the secular mind might gravitate towards natural explanations and evidence-based reasoning.
That's one way to think about it, though. It's not a hard and fast rule. But it does suggest that early exposure to religious concepts can have a significant impact on how our minds develop and how we approach the big questions about life meaning and the universe.
It's fascinating to think about how those early influences, religious or secular, shape our cognitive biases and ultimately our worldviews.
And those influences don't stop in childhood. We're constantly being shaped by social and cultural forces, whether it's through the media we consume, the people we interact with, or the broader societal trends we're exposed to.
So even as adults, our religious beliefs are not fixed, but are in constant dialogue with the world around us. I guess that explains why we see so much diversity and evolution within religious traditions.
Precisely. And one of the things that CSR highlights is this dynamic interplay between our cognitive predispositions, social learning, and cultural evolution.
It's like a complex ecosystem of influences all shaping and reshaping our beliefs over time.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand these influences, not just to explain religious belief, but also to address the challenges that religion poses in the modern world.
Speaking of challenges, I wanted to ask about the darker side of religion. We've talked a lot about the positive aspects, but there's no denying that religion has been used to justify violence and oppression throughout history. Does CSR have anything to say about that?
It does. CSR recognizes that religion, like any powerful force, can be used for both good and ill, and it offers some insights into the psychological and social mechanisms that can lead to religious extremism and violence. One factor that comes up repeatedly is the in-group, out-group dynamic.
Okay.
That's common in many religious groups.
That us versus them mentality. I can
Mhm.
see how that could easily lead to conflict, especially when tied to beliefs about absolute truth or moral superiority.
Exactly. And when you combine that with cognitive biases, like confirmation bias,
Hmm.
the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs,
Right.
it can create a really dangerous mix. People become very entrenched in their worldview,
Right.
dismissing any evidence that contradicts their beliefs.
So instead of open-mindedness and dialogue,
Like,
you get dogmatism and intolerance. It's a stark reminder that our cognitive biases, the same ones that make us susceptible to religious belief in the first place, can also be exploited to harmful ends.
that's a crucial point, and it underscores the importance of critical thinking skills
Mm-hmm.
and media literacy, especially in today's world where information and misinformation spreads so rapidly.
It seems like CSR isn't just about understanding religion, it's also about equipping people with the tools to navigate the complexities of belief in a responsible and ethical way.
Absolutely. It's about fostering dialogue, encouraging empathy, and promoting a more nuanced understanding of the human mind and its relationship with religious ideas.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the evolutionary roots of religious thought to the neurological underpinnings of religious experience to the social and cultural forces that shape our beliefs. It's clear that CSR is a vast and multifaceted field, with implications that extend far beyond the study of religion itself.
It truly is. And as our understanding of the human mind continues to evolve, so too will our understanding of religion and its role in human societies.
If someone wanted to delve deeper into this topic, where would you point them? What books or resources have been particularly influential for you?
Oh, there are so many great resources out there.
I know.
Religion Explained by Pascal Boyer is a classic introduction to the field,
Okay.
written in a very clear and engaging style.
Yeah.
And for those who are interested in the neuroscience of religion, The Believing Brain by Michael Shermer is a fascinating read.
Excellent. We'll be sure to link to those in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more.
And of course, the Cognitive Science of Religion website is a great resource as well.
All right.
It has links to articles or books and even podcasts on the topic.
Well, I think we've officially reached the end of our deep dive.
Oh.
My mind is buzzing with new insights, and I have a feeling I'll be pondering these ideas for quite some time.
I'm glad to hear it. It's been a pleasure exploring these fascinating topics with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the human mind and the religious impulse. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring the complex interplay between belief culture and the evolution of our amazing brains. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.
One factor that comes up repeatedly is the in-group, out-group dynamic that's common in many religious groups.
That us versus them mentality.
Right.
I can see how that could easily lead to conflict, especially when tied to beliefs about absolute truth or moral superiority.
Exactly. And when you combine that with cognitive biases like confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, it can create a really dangerous mix. People become very entrenched in their worldview, dismissing any evidence that contradicts their beliefs.
So instead of open-mindedness and dialogue, you get dogmatism and intolerance. It's a stark reminder that our cognitive biases, the same ones that make us susceptible to religious belief in the first place, can also be exploited to harmful ends.
That's a crucial point, and it underscores the importance of critical thinking skills and media literacy, especially in today's world where information and misinformation spreads so rapidly.
It seems like CSR isn't just about understanding religion, it's also about equipping people with the tools to navigate the complexities of belief in a responsible and ethical way.
Absolutely. It's about fostering dialogue, encouraging empathy, and promoting a more nuanced understanding of the human mind and its relationship with religious ideas.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the evolutionary roots of religious thought to the neurological underpinnings of religious experience to the social and cultural forces that shape our beliefs. It's clear that CSR is a vast and multifaceted field with implications that extend far beyond the study of religion itself.
It truly is. And as our understanding of the human mind continues to evolve, so too will our understanding of religion and its role in human societies.
If someone wanted to delve deeper into this topic, where would you point them? What books or resources have been particularly influential for you?
Oh, there are so many great resources out there. Religion Explained by Pascal Boyer is a classic introduction to the field, written in a very clear and engaging style. And for those who are interested in the neuroscience of religion, The Believing Brain by Michael Shermer is a fascinating read.
Excellent. We'll be sure to link to those in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more.
And of course, the Cognitive Science of Religion website is a great resource as well. It has links to articles, books, and even podcasts on the topic.
Well, I think we've officially reached the end of our deep dive. My mind is buzzing with new insights, and I have a feeling I'll be pondering these ideas for quite some time.
I'm glad to hear it. It's been a pleasure exploring these fascinating topics with you.
Likewise, and to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey into the human mind and the religious impulse. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring the complex interplay between belief culture and the evolution of our amazing brains. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.